And I too want to welcome the Minister and indeed his officials to the House, where you will hear what I believe will be a balanced debate on this very important topic. The Minister, I'm saying it, you need our support, you deserve our support in all of your efforts to increase housing output, residential and rental. And I think that's acknowledged by the contributions of all members, opposition and others, and you will hear various proposals that will assist you in that here in this House. Because I know, Minister, that you're doing your utmost to prevent further homelessness. Yeah, you want to have the objective of a sustainable, normalised rental market. And I believe in this House we must do all in our powers to help you to protect and sustain long-term tenancies. The PRTB has been mentioned. They play a very important role in terms of registration, monitoring compliance and dispute adjudication. And I would agree it is important, and I know positive strides have been made in this respect, to adequately resource the PRTB to allow them to do their work and to adjudicate and make effective and early decisions where they have to. I do have to put on the record also, my concern that 1,700 landlords have left the market since 2015, and that is for a reason, and I think we need to understand those reasons. And I have no doubt that there are many rogue landlords out there, and we must also acknowledge that there are rogue tenants there also. And we've all heard the horror stories from both sides. And it is important, that all landlords and indeed all tenants should not be tarred with the same brush when people step out of line. We need, therefore, Minister, I believe with legislation, and we've heard it already with contributions, to be very careful that legislation is seen as fair. It's seen, that it's fair and that it addresses the societal challenges that we face in terms of housing and rental in the current climate. I think we all recognise that we have a rental crisis at the moment, and that's why we have rental pressure zones designated, and therefore we must respond, and that's why I support the legislation being brought to the House tonight. But I do believe, Minister, that we should review it after 2 or 3 years, hopefully when we see the housing output continue to increase as it is, and hopefully as we see the market normalising, that we should review matters at some stage in the future. And I'd be interested to hear your views in that respect. The bill itself will enhance powers to investigate landlords and impose sanctions in relation to non-compliance, and that's as it should be. Standards and regulations are set down to protect tenants, but I would agree with Senator McDowell also, where sanctions do apply to landlords. We should also, and maybe the PRTB have a role here if we empower them to do so, where tenants step out of line and where they're not being fair, not being reasonable, that they too can be sanctioned for not respecting property and not respecting the tenancy that they might be offered. So it works both ways in my view, and I think that's important to recognise. The bill also ensures that annual registration by landlords of tenancies are kept up to date in terms of records. The bill also moves, and I think in fairness to Senator Humphreys, I've heard him raise it numerous times in this House in relation to the issue of Airbnb and how it's affecting long-term tenancies. And I know, Minister, you too understand the pressures that that's bringing. So this bill too will regulate short-term letting in rental pressure zones. It will address where rental properties are in these zones in terms of periods of rental for less than 14 days, and that's essentially to address the Airbnb issue, where good rental properties are possibly be taken up with short-term lettings, and I'd understand why people might want to do that. But I think we have a crisis, and I think we need to respond to it, and this is a resource that's available to us to try and respond to that crisis. And I think this is a mechanism and a measure being introduced in legislation in a crisis period by the Minister to try and address that, and I think that should be acknowledged also. And I think you said by the 1st of July, Minister, you hope that will be implemented, and you also committed to the House that the regulations for short-term letting will be consulted in the Joint Oireachtas Committee, and I welcome that approach too, Minister, because you'll hear a wide range of views there also. As I said, Minister, legislation must be fair in how we deal with both landlord and tenant. That we have to be concerned when landlords are leaving the market, because the less landlords we have, well then the less tenancies that will be available for people that need them. And I think it is important that we see increases in housing output in both the private sector and indeed in the public sector as well. And that's something that we need to ensure continues. There are a scarcity of properties. I think we all acknowledge that. that, and we have upward rental pressures, and I think that's beginning to level off, and I think that's welcome also. I note recent comments from economist Ronan Lyons, where he said the solution to this is to encourage private developers to build and institutional investors to become landlords. And the alternative view to that from various housing associations and social housing advocates is that housing should be provided mainly and only by the state. I believe the solution is in the middle. It's a balance of both, where we need to see more private residential development, but we also need to see more social housing developments also. And I think Rebuilding Ireland is the plan that will address that, and it is beginning to become fruitful, and we can see that with the numbers and thousands of houses that are becoming available year on year, but that needs to continue. Minister, I needn't tell you about the increases in rental properties. Nationally, it's now at €1,366 average. I know it's much more than that in Dublin. In Waterford City, just for the record, it's €972 per month, and in the county it's €847 per month. And the concern out there amongst people is that rent is now becoming more expensive than actual mortgage, and that has to be a cause of concern. It isn't normal in the normal scheme of things, so therefore we need to look at new mechanisms, and I know you're doing that all the time, Minister, in terms of affordable housing for purchase and indeed affordable rental as well. So, Minister, I want to wish you well. I know that there will be criticisms of the legislation, but I think people should understand it's a response to the crisis that we're in. We're being innovative and trying to leverage properties that are there that unfortunately are not available due to short-term letting, trying to make them available for long-term lettings, and that's essentially to prevent homelessness. It's to try and make rental more sustainable in this country, and I want to support you in your efforts, Minister, and I certainly hope the House will also.
Thank you, Senator.